The enchanting allure of the Black Mist Forest. Nestled in the remote southwest corner of New Zealand lies the Black Mist Forest, a destination shrouded in mystery and unmatched natural beauty. To the average traveler, this forest seems like a slice of paradise, a place where time slows down and the modern world feels like a distant memory. Dense ancient trees tower over walking trails, their canopy filtering sunlight into a kaleidoscope of colors that dance upon moss-covered ground. Streams with water so clear you can see every pebble weave through the forest like glistening veins, and the symphony of chirping birds and rustling leaves is a melody that stays etched in the memory of every visitor. Adventurers across the globe have been captivated by its ethereal charm. Every year, thousands of hikers and nature enthusiasts make the pilgrimage to the Black Mist Forest, each yearning for a chance to test their courage, conquer its rugged trails, and marvel at unspoiled wilderness untouched by the burgeoning metropolises elsewhere in the world. From snow-capped peaks visible in the horizon, to meadows blanketed in wildflowers during spring, the forest's vistas paint a portrait of serenity and grandeur, making it a photographer's dream and a trekker's Eden. However, beyond its postcard-perfect charm, the Black Mist Forest has crafted a reputation that isn't all idyllic. Locals speak of it in hushed tones, almost as if afraid to disturb its secrets. Stories whispered around flickering campfires warn of an aura of eerie stillness deeper in the woods, where the light dissipates and even the wind seems too fearful to venture. The forest is nicknamed the Shadow Haven by some, a poetic nod to the thick layers of mist that seem to hover perpetually between the trees, lending an almost otherworldly haze that distorts both distance and direction. The duality of its enchanting beauty and its ominous reputation stirs an irresistible sense of adventure in many. Hikers, backpackers, and thrill-seekers feel compelled to unearth its mysteries, embarking on treks that can last anywhere from a weekend to weeks if one is daring and prepared enough to venture into its most secluded areas. For some, it is about self-discovery, a test of one's endurance, resilience, and resolve when faced with such rugged terrain. For others, it's about escaping the chaos of the modern world and reconnecting with something primal, something pure. But not all who enter are prepared. It is said that the forest chooses its own stories, its own adventurers. Over the years, stories have surfaced, whispered nervously among locals, of travelers who vanish without a trace, swallowed whole by the dense wilderness. Though official records are sparse and often inconclusive, the whisperings of shadowy figures rustling through the trees and unexplainable disappearances paint a chilling picture that seems to contradict the forest's natural splendor. Despite the creeping unease these tales invoke, the allure of the Black Mist Forest remains undisputed. The brave, or perhaps the overly confident, see the warnings as a challenge, an invitation to uncover what lies beyond the ordinary. As the fog hangs low and the trees lean in close, the Black Mist Forest seems to whisper its siren call, "Come closer, come and see for yourself the wonders and the secrets hidden within these ancient woods." A chain of mysterious disappearances. The Black Mist Forest is no stranger to legends, but it's the chilling rumors of unexplained disappearances that have placed it permanently in the realm of cautionary tales. Since the early 1980s, the serene and sprawling wilderness has become the epicenter of a series of baffling missing person cases, leaving locals rattled and authorities scrambling for answers. What makes these disappearances so haunting isn't merely their frequency, but the near-complete lack of evidence. It all began with the alarming vanishing of solo backpackers venturing into the expanse of the forest, often young adventurers drawn to the allure of trekking in pristine, untouched beauty. They came from all corners of the globe, eager wanderers arriving with heavy backpacks, good intentions, and dreams of adventure beneath the towering trees. But what started as a once-in-a-blue-moon oddity soon spiraled into a recurring nightmare. Trail records show hikers who signed in at entry points but never signed out. Missing posters soon adorned bulletin boards and village cafes in neighboring towns, featuring bright, smiling young faces accompanied by desperate pleas from their families, asking for any information, a sight that would become disturbingly commonplace over the next 2 decades. The troubling pattern emerged. Individuals, often isolated or traveling in pairs, would embark on seemingly routine expeditions into the forest, only to vanish without a trace. Park rangers and search and rescue teams scoured the woods tirelessly, but turned up nothing. No articles of clothing, no disturbed campsites, no signs of survival. It was as if the forest had simply swallowed them whole. The sheer expanse and ruggedness of the terrain provided an easy cloak for mystery. Trails would splinter and fade the deeper one ventured, and the ever-present mist blurred not only sight but also any sense of logic or direction. Rumors began to swirl, and with time, an air of paranoia crept into the blackened, twisting trails of the forest. Locals whispered that the forest had long been cursed, that the indigenous Maori tribes avoided certain tapu or forbidden areas for fear of angering restless spirits. Some villagers believed the forest itself was alive, a guardian force that punished trespassers who trampled on its sanctity. Others speculated darker forces were at play, rogue hunters, occult rituals, or even a lone predator exploiting the labyrinthine cover of the wilderness. The early 1990s saw a sharp uptick in cases that elevated the mystery into national and even international spotlight. News outlets began running sensational headlines: "The forest that eats people," "Backpackers beware," "Black Mist takes another hiker," and "New Zealand's haunted trails, no one returns." Television reporters in raincoats stood at trailheads speaking into cameras as thick fog blanketed the woods behind them. The mystique of the forest, once an asset to its tourism, was now a liability, and visitor numbers plummeted. Police formed specialized units to investigate the disappearances. While some cases were attributed to accidents or animal attacks, it became increasingly clear that foul play couldn't be ruled out. What troubled investigators most was the lack of clear patterns among the missing. Victims ranged in nationality, gender, and hiking experience. Some were seasoned trekkers equipped with the best gear, while others were casual tourists meandering through. The one unifying thread: all disappeared in the shadowy depths of the Black Mist Forest. In 1990, a pair of brothers, both experienced climbers, went missing during a weekend excursion. Days passed, then weeks, and finally months before a charred campsite was discovered deep within an off-trail section of the woods. The brothers' belongings were scattered around the site, partially burned and torn. No footprints, no human remains, just eerie, incomplete wreckage. Some investigators blamed it on a lightning strike or a sudden animal attack, but locals were less convinced, claiming the area was cursed, and the brothers had stumbled somewhere they didn't belong. By 1992, the Black Mist Forest had become a proverbial black hole for travelers, claiming yet another 3 hikers. This time, a close-knit group of friends. They had promised their families they would be back within 4 days, exploring only the well-marked paths. Search parties found nothing except for one chilling clue: a lone, muddy boot tangled in the underbrush belonging to one of the hikers. Experienced guides admitted that advanced disorientation, severe weather conditions, or even exhaustion could make survival nearly impossible. But the boot, still caked in fresh soil, suggested the hikers hadn't been far, yet they were never found. In local taverns, theories ranged from suspicion of sophisticated abductors to ghostly phantoms guiding lost souls to their doom. An ominous joke began to circulate among the older locals: those who enter the Black Mist may not be lost, some may just not want to be found. Yet, despite the tales and the mounting disappearances, the forest's allure remains undeniable. New waves of young adventurers, skeptics of folklore, and thrill-seekers show up every year, determined to write their own chapters in the misty woods. Only a handful return with stories of strange noises, shadowy figures in the trees, or the overwhelming feeling of being stalked by unseen eyes as they race through the fog. For every survivor who escapes with an unsettling tale, there's someone else who never comes home. The Black Mist Forest is more than just a setting for scenic hikes. It's a place where wonder and fear are constantly at odds. It's where you can find yourself entirely alone, yet feel as though you're being watched. The missing people might be gone, but the echoes of their stories remind everyone that the forest keeps its secrets closely guarded. Warnings left unheeded. The Black Mist Forest has always carried an air of mystery, but for those who call the countryside surrounding it home, it's more than just cautionary tales whispered to scare off gullible tourists. Locals take its dangers seriously, recounting strange anecdotes passed down through generations. Long before its allure captivated global adventurers, the forest was regarded as a sacred yet forbidden ground by indigenous Maori communities who warned of its tapu, areas marked as spiritually restricted. According to lore, angering the invisible guardians of the woods could result in punishment far harsher than anyone could imagine. Over time, as settlers moved in and modernized the surrounding regions, these cultural and spiritual warnings were dismissed as folklore, dismissed by outsiders as old wives' tales. Still, local villagers refused to tread some of the forest's darker paths, certainly not after sundown. "The trees have ears," they'd mutter cryptically, avoiding the eyes of naive hikers who thought they were being overly dramatic. By the mid-20th century, the forest's haunting reputation intensified, not so much because of spiritual beliefs, but due to unnervingly consistent accounts of bizarre occurrences. Hunters swore they often felt as if they were being followed, even while walking alone. Birds would suddenly fall silent for long stretches, as if nature itself held its breath. Others reported finding abandoned backpacks off the beaten trails, eerily untouched as though the owners had vanished into thin air. Even the hardy rural folk who generally shrugged off tall tales couldn't ignore some of the stranger details that seeped into their consciousness over the years. Elderly farmers spoke of lights flickering deep in the woods at odd hours, lights that could not be coming from lantern-wielding campers, as they seemed to dance erratically and vanish the moment anyone approached. Some villagers reported hearing anguished cries emanate from within the forest's depths on particularly foggy nights. Often when they investigated, there would be no one to be found, just a vacuum of sound so deafening that even the insects seemed to stop buzzing. Then there were the strange apparitions seen at night. Rumors persisted about shadowy figures lingering between the trees, figures too tall and too still to be human. Drivers claimed they'd see silhouettes emerge from the mist on late-night highways bordering the forest, only to blink and find the figures had disappeared once their headlights passed. Such stories were often waved off as tricks of the imagination, mere products of exhaustion or overactive minds, but one thing remained constant. Those who spoke of these things always seemed genuinely unsettled. Despite such eerie accounts, these warnings largely fell on deaf ears for adventurers. To the average backpacker or hiker, the idea of New Zealand's famously lush landscapes hiding unspeakable horrors felt absurd. Many saw the Black Mist Forest as a picturesque escape from urban chaos. The warnings from locals generally went unnoticed, shrugged off as superstitions from people who had never left their small towns. A particularly daring subset of travelers even viewed the unsettling stories as a challenge. To them, the haunted vibes of the forest only added to the thrill. "If you're too scared of a spooky story, what are you even doing here?" one hiker scoffed to a local ranger in 1985 before setting out on a solo trek. He never returned. Villagers had their own unwritten rules for engaging with the forest. First and foremost, children were told never to step foot in the woods alone. Even playing games near the edge of the forest was considered reckless. Second, no one was to venture into the forest during the witching hour between midnight and 3 a.m. And finally, if you ever felt that the air suddenly went cold or unnaturally silent, it was best to turn back immediately. One of the most repeated warnings came in the form of an ominous old saying, "The forest does not like to be disturbed, and it always gets its due." However, year after year, flocks of hikers and globetrotters eager to have their fill of pristine wilderness ignored such words of caution. After all, what dangers could a forest in a first-world country really hold? Unfortunately, the price of ignorance has become unmistakably evident to those who stayed behind to tell the tales. Locals who often gathered in hushed groups at pubs when the latest string of disappearances made the news. They don't understand that they're not walking into just any forest. Black Mist chooses who it keeps, one bartender murmured in an unusually candid conversation after several drinks. People think the warnings are folklore, if they only knew. And yet, it wasn't just supernatural fears that locals worried about. They'd seen too many headlines featuring bedraggled, desperate families searching for a loved one who came to the forest seeking adventure but never made it out. The sheer expanse of the woods with its hidden ravines and maze-like structure could easily disorient the unprepared. "It's not just bad luck," insisted one park ranger in a local interview. "It's arrogance. They come in thinking the forest is theirs to conquer." Even as one disappearance followed another, the allure of the Black Mist Forest remained undiminished. Warnings posted at most trailheads, rudimentary signs cautioning adventurers against solo hiking or venturing too deep without a guide, were rare deterrents. Enthusiastic travelers ignored such advice, many of them chasing highly curated social media moments or an adrenaline-fueled sense of wanderlust. The Black Mist Forest did not mind their confidence, it simply waited. Police discover the first body. It was the early morning of June 15, 1990, a date that marked the start of a haunting unraveling in the Black Mist Forest. Two locals, avid joggers who often used the early hours to take advantage of the forest's crisp air and secluded paths, set out on their usual route. Neither of them anticipated that the peace and serenity of this familiar trail would be shattered by the discovery they were about to make. As they jogged deeper into the denser sections of the forest, the sunlight that had earlier filtered through the trees began to dim under the ever-present mist. About halfway through their route, near an area where the trail forked into two narrower paths, the joggers paused. One of them scrunched up their nose. "Do you smell that?" the woman asked her jogging partner. The man stopped and inhaled deeply, immediately recoiling at the odd, acrid stench that seemed to hang in the air. It was faint at first but grew stronger as they lingered. It wasn't the smell of damp earth or decaying leaves that they were accustomed to. This scent was unnervingly different, almost sinister. Driven by curiosity and an unwelcome sense of foreboding, they decided to trace the scent, veering off the beaten path. It didn't take long to find the source. Beneath a large, moss-covered boulder in a shallow ravine, they came upon what initially appeared to be a pile of old clothing, but as they drew closer and the reality set in, their breaths caught in their throats. The crumpled shape lying beneath the boulder wasn't clothing at all. It was a human body. The sight was both horrifying and surreal. The victim, a young woman by her physical frame, had been left face down. Her hands were bound tightly behind her back with coarse rope, as though she had been restrained before death. The air around her was heavy with decay, the odor almost unbearable for the joggers as they stood frozen, unsure whether to scream or run. Instead, they fumbled quickly for a phone and called the local authorities. Within minutes, the trailhead exploded into chaos as police swarmed the area, cordoning off the scene and setting up a base of operations. Investigators trudged through ankle-deep undergrowth, their flashlights slicing through the perpetual mist as they documented every angle of the gruesome discovery. Forensics teams worked tirelessly to examine the body, despite its advanced state of decomposition. Initial findings painted a grim picture. The woman, estimated to be in her early 20s, had clearly been dead for several months. Deep lacerations and stab wounds covered her torso, but the cause of death wasn't immediately obvious due to the extensive decomposition. Her hands were still clenched tightly into fists, a detail that stood out sharply to the investigating officers, as though she had been gripping something in desperation even in her final moments. And then there was the hair. Embedded between her clenched fingers were strands of hair, long, dark, and coarse. Forensic scientists would later confirm that these strands didn't belong to the victim, igniting early suspicions that they might be from her killer. By evening, the lead investigator on the scene, Detective Alan Brewer, held his first press briefing. Standing beneath the flickering headlights of TV cameras, the weary detective addressed a crowd of reporters. "We have recovered what can only be described as a deeply disturbing case of homicide within the Black Mist Forest. Investigators are working diligently to collect as much evidence as possible. At this time, we urge anyone who has recently visited the area or who may have noticed suspicious activity to come forward." But this was merely the beginning. As the body was transported to the coroner's office for further examination, fragments of a greater horror began to take shape. The level of violence inflicted upon the victim, precision-like in nature, hinted at a deliberate, premeditated act. The following day, forensic examination of the scene uncovered more chilling details. Near the body, police discovered faint footprints partially obscured by months of rain and shifting soil. Though degraded, they pointed toward a man of considerable physical size. More disturbingly, nearby, investigators found discarded remnants that didn't seem to belong to the victim. A torn scrap of fabric, consistent with a mask, a frayed piece of rope identical to the one binding the victim's wrists, and, most unnerving of all, a ring of cigarette butts encircling the edges of the murder site. Detective Brewer was stumped. "It's almost like whoever did this wanted to come back here and sit with it. Like they revisited the scene of the crime," he told a colleague while standing at the edge of the site, his voice tinged with disbelief. Within a week, the coroner released a preliminary report. The victim had been stabbed at least 15 times in the chest and abdomen, and the angle and depth of the wounds revealed that the assailant either had medical knowledge or significant experience with knives. Despite their best efforts, the coroner could not determine whether the woman had been sexually assaulted due to the state of her remains. What could be confirmed, however, was that she had likely been killed on site and left to rot in the unforgiving isolation of the forest. And then came the identification. Specialized DNA analysis revealed the victim's name, Emily Brooks, a 22-year-old college graduate and avid backpacker from the United States. According to passport records and testimony from her parents, Emily had traveled to New Zealand 6 months earlier after saving up for a solo adventure. She had sent postcards home detailing her excitement about exploring the Black Mist Forest. The last contact her parents received was a letter mailed in late November, where she mentioned meeting kind strangers who had offered her a ride into the forest's southern edge. The revelation sent shockwaves through the local community and international media. Headlines painted Emily's story with a mix of sympathy and terror. American adventurer's dream becomes nightmare, and Black Mist Forest claims another lost soul. Detective Brewer knew all too well what would happen next. This tragedy would bring more desperate families to his door. People aching for information about their own missing loved ones. What no one knew, not yet, was that Emily's horrifying death was only the first chapter of what would become a saga that haunted the Black Mist Forest for years to come. A lead to the second crime scene. Barely a week had passed since Emily Brooks' body had been discovered, and Detective Alan Brewer was already a man on edge. By now, he had learned to tread lightly in discussions with the press, choosing his words carefully to avoid fueling the hysteria surrounding the Black Mist Forest. Yet the trail, much like the thick mist that perpetually shrouded the area, felt disturbingly opaque. Every lead seemed to taper off into nothingness, leaving Brewer and his team chasing shadows. But the Black Mist Forest wasn't done revealing its horrors. It was a sunny Sunday morning, one of those rare breaks from the gloom that usually hung over the dense canopy. A family of 4 decided to take a small hike along one of the forest's more popular and relatively safe routes, Line Creek Trail, located about 7 miles from where Emily's body had been uncovered. The plan was simple: a picnic by the creek and maybe some photos of the scenic waterfalls that dotted the area. The family's 9-year-old son, excited to explore nature, started wandering slightly ahead despite his parents' warnings not to stray too far. That's when the boy noticed something in the underbrush, a small metallic glint catching the sunlight. "Dad, come check this out!" he yelled, crouching over the peculiar object. Curiosity quickly turned to dread. The boy's father, hurrying over to find out what had caught his son's interest, froze in horror as he processed what lay half-hidden beneath a thin layer of damp leaves. A small hunting knife, its hilt covered in what appeared to be dried blood, gleamed ominously in the light. The family immediately contacted authorities, and within hours the scene was swarmed with investigators who meticulously combed the area. As officers expanded the search radius, they stumbled upon a horrifying discovery: a shallow grave less than 15 yards from where the boy had spotted the knife. The grave was hastily dug, barely deep enough to conceal the partially decomposed body inside. Unlike Emily's body, this victim's remains were skeletal, indicating that the murder had occurred much earlier. The layer of soil covering the body had eroded over time, allowing exposure to scavengers and the elements. Detective Brewer arrived shortly after the discovery and felt a sinking sensation in his stomach as he viewed the grim sight. Even after years of homicide cases, there was something uniquely unsettling about finding remains in the Black Mist Forest. It wasn't just the decay or the brutality, it was the overwhelming silence of this place, broken only by the occasional sound of leaves rustling or a crow's cry in the distance. Forensic teams began processing the second scene with precision. Some crucial finds included a set of synthetic fibers clinging to the edges of the grave. The texture and coloration led experts to hypothesize that the body may have been wrapped in a tarp or heavy-duty fabric before burial, though it had since disintegrated under the moist, acidic conditions of the forest floor. Nearby they found fragments of rope that matched the binding used on Emily Brooks, a chilling sign that the killer had not only repeated their crimes but likely had a consistent modus operandi. After carefully extracting the skeletal remains, the forensic anthropologist noted severe fractures to the ribs and skull. This suggested intense blunt force trauma, quite possibly the ultimate cause of death. However, there were no personal belongings at the scene to aid immediately in identifying the victim. Brewer's team did, however, stumble upon something else, something sinister. Half buried among the roots of a gnarled oak a few feet away from the grave was a weathered Polaroid photograph. It showed a group of smiling young people on what looked like a camping trip. The forest in the background was unmistakable. It was Black Mist Forest. The back of the photo bore a scrawled note in smeared ink reading, August 1988, Line Creek Trail. The discovery of the Polaroid turned the case on its head. Detective Brewer hypothesized that the people in the photograph might have been potential victims, or possibly even the killer's targets. In either case, the photograph served as a haunting breadcrumb, adding more weight to the growing theory that the Black Mist Forest was the hunting ground of a serial predator. But before Brewer could unravel the significance of the find, things became even more complicated. Another officer reported finding a peculiar arrangement nearby, a circle of broken branches forming what looked like a crude, makeshift symbol on the forest floor. The branches appeared deliberately placed, though they were weathered and moss-covered. While some investigators dismissed it as accidental, a product of falling foliage, others felt it might hold some significance, perhaps even a message from the killer. The local media wasted no time amplifying the mystery. Within hours, news of the second crime scene was broadcast far and wide. "Another body found in the Black Mist Forest," one headline proclaimed. Others ran stories branding the forest as New Zealand's very own Bermuda Triangle, with taglines like "The woods that keep their secrets," and "How many more victims lie beneath the mist." The sensational coverage brought renewed pressure on Brewer's team, but Brewer himself resisted the temptation to let conjecture dictate the investigation. And yet, the pieces all seemed to connect in ways he couldn't deny. A pattern was emerging, one that seemed to suggest a deeply calculated mind at work, someone who knew the forest intimately and exploited its natural isolation to carry out their crimes unnoticed. Leads from locals continued to pour in. A handful of hunters reported finding other oddities over the years in areas of the forest: a single shoe left in perfect condition, a campsite abandoned but undisturbed, and carved symbols on tree trunks that didn't match typical trail markings. Each tip felt like a breadcrumb too small to follow, but together they painted a picture of a forest that concealed far more than its scenic trails would suggest. As Detective Brewer stood at the edge of the graveyard-like stillness that surrounded the second crime scene, he couldn't escape the gnawing feeling in his gut. Black Mist Forest wasn't done with them yet. This wasn't just a case of murder, it was the beginning of a nightmare that would soon unfurl its darkest secrets. The missing hikers that shocked the nation. In the summer of 1992, the Black Mist Forest added yet another chapter to its haunting and increasingly infamous reputation. What began as a seemingly ordinary hiking trip by three young travelers turned into one of New Zealand's most baffling and chilling mysteries, capturing the attention of both the nation and the world. This wasn't a lone backpacker vanishing quietly into the trees. This was a close-knit group, three childhood friends who all disappeared together, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and a trail of heartbreak. The group consisted of Henry Watts, 26, a well-known outdoor enthusiast and local guide; Stephanie Miller, 25, an artist and nature photographer with a deep love for untouched wilderness; and Lucas Hayes, 27, a journalist who was documenting their short adventure for an independent travel magazine. All three hailed from the United Kingdom and had arrived in New Zealand just weeks before, eager to explore the legendary sights of the country, including the mysterious Black Mist Forest. Initially, their journey into the forest was planned as a short excursion. According to friends and family, the group had been meticulous in their preparation. They had consulted maps, scouted trails, and even spoken with one of the local rangers about the best routes to take. They assured loved ones back home that they'd be hiking well-marked paths, and that the trip wouldn't last more than 3 days. "We'll stay where it's safe," Stephanie wrote in a postcard from Queenstown just a few days before the trip. "The forest may be mysterious, but it's just another adventure to conquer. Don't worry." On the day of their departure into the forest, Henry, Stephanie, and Lucas signed in at the trailhead registry, a common practice for those entering the Black Mist. Witnesses recall seeing the trio in high spirits, their backpacks fully loaded with supplies, cameras, and notebooks. The three friends joked with other hikers, posed for a photo near the forest's entrance, and walked confidently toward the dense greenery. That was the last confirmed sighting of them. 4 days passed, and when the group failed to return or sign out at the trail registry, concerns mounted. Park rangers initially brushed off the delay, attributing it to a classic case of overly enthusiastic adventurers spending extra time in nature. But as the days stretched into a week, and then longer, their friends and families sounded the alarm. A large-scale search operation was launched, featuring over 100 local volunteers, professional search and rescue teams, and even a helicopter equipped with infrared scanning capabilities. Despite the immense effort, the forest refused to give up its secrets. The search turned up nothing. No tents, no discarded items, no signs of recent fire pits. Even the thorough canine units couldn't pick up a definitive scent trail. The trails they were supposed to be exploring showed no distinct footprints. It was as though the three had simply vanished into thin air, and for the families awaiting any news, the absence of evidence was even more agonizing than the fear of a confirmed tragedy. Weeks passed, and as hope dwindled, the public's fascination with the case only grew. Media outlets plastered the missing hikers' faces across every newspaper and television broadcast. The headlines were grim and dramatic. "The Black Mist claims them too," "Vanishing Act or something more sinister," and "The woods where people disappear forever." Journalists arrived in droves to the small towns surrounding the forest, interviewing locals, conspiracy theorists, and anyone who had a shred of information about the enigmatic forest. Rumors ran rampant. Some locals believed the hikers had accidentally wandered into one of the off-limits tapu areas and offended the protective spirits of the forest. Others whispered about a rogue survivalist hiding deep in the woods who preyed on unsuspecting travelers. A few even suggested that the three friends met a tragic end due to unforeseen environmental dangers, unstable ground near ravines, sudden freak storms, or hidden sinkholes. The most bizarre theories spoke of UFO abductions or extra-dimensional phenomena fueled by the mist's ability to distort perception and perhaps reality itself. Then there was the chilling possibility that the disappearances weren't accidental at all. By 1992, whispers of a serial predator stalking the Black Mist Forest had begun to circulate in earnest, especially after the discovery of Emily Brooks's body 2 years earlier. Though police had few solid leads, the eerily similar circumstances of multiple disappearances suggested something more sinister than chance or misadventure. To some, the missing hikers didn't just walk off the trail, they were hunted. As the months passed, search parties scaled back, and the missing persons case turned cold. But that didn't stop the speculation, or the questions. Friends of the three hikers pushed authorities relentlessly to continue their efforts, criticizing what they perceived as a premature decision to wind down the operation. However, without a single piece of tangible evidence to go on, even the most determined officers hit a wall. Years later, strange fragments began to surface. A lone hiking boot was discovered 12 miles from the group's intended trail. It had been swallowed by dense underbrush, caked in mud, and partially torn, as though it had been left exposed for years. Investigators later identified it as belonging to Lucas Hayes. What puzzled forensic experts was the location. It was in an area completely off-limits to hikers with no trail leading to or from it. Even more bizarre was its condition. The boot showed no signs of wear consistent with being walked in for miles. It was pristine apart from the mud, as though it had been placed there deliberately, but that was all anyone ever found. In the years since the hikers vanished, the case has become folklore, one more eerie footnote in the already long history of the Black Mist Forest. To this day, posters featuring the faces of Henry, Stephanie, and Lucas remain tacked up on trailheads, bulletin boards, and cafe walls in surrounding towns. The slogan beneath their pictures reads hauntingly, "Someone knows what happened, please come forward." With no conclusive answers, the disappearance of the trio from 1992 stands as one of the most chilling episodes in the forest's dark legacy. The unanswered question remains, what really happened to them? Did they wander too far, encounter unforgiving terrain, or fall victim to forces hiding in plain sight within the mist? Or perhaps, the forest simply decided to keep them. The lucky survivor's chilling testimony. A year after the mysterious disappearance of the trio of hikers in the Black Mist Forest, a break in the case came from an unexpected source, someone who went into the forest but lived to tell the tale. His story would send chills down the spines of even the most skeptical investigators and locals who had come to accept the deadly reputation of the forest as something almost mythical. The survivor was Jared Olson, a 23-year-old hitchhiker from Melbourne, Australia. Jared had embarked on an adventure through New Zealand's South Island, making his way from town to town with nothing but a backpack, a pair of sturdy boots, and an appetite for exploring remote and rugged landscapes. He had heard of the Black Mist Forest during his travels but, like so many others before him, dismissed its eerie folklore as mere exaggeration. To Jared it was just another wilderness to conquer, another bucket list destination to add to his growing collection of outdoor escapades. Jared's encounter didn't begin in the forest itself, but on a desolate road that snaked through the foothills bordering the dark expanse of the Black Mist. It was late afternoon, and the weather had begun to turn. Ominous clouds rolled across the sky, casting a gloomy shadow over the narrow asphalt stretch that seemed to wind endlessly into the fog-blanketed horizon. Hoping to reach the nearest trailhead before dusk, Jared stuck out his thumb at every car that passed, determined to catch a ride before the coming storm. It wasn't long before a dusty gray pickup truck slowed to a stop beside him. The driver was an older man, perhaps in his late 40s, with an unkempt beard and piercing pale blue eyes. His appearance was weathered, his clothes smudged with dirt, and a faded red cap was perched crookedly on his head. Something about him struck Jared as off. It could have been the way he avoided eye contact or the raspy tone in his voice that made his simple greeting, "Need a ride?" sound more like a warning than an invitation. But the rain had already begun to drizzle, and Jared reasoned it was likely just the eccentricity of a rural local. The first few miles of the ride passed in silence except for the low hum of the truck's engine and the faint patter of rain on the windshield. Jared tried to make small talk, asking about the area and whether the driver knew of any good spots to camp in the Black Mist Forest. The man's response was unsettling. A slight chuckle, followed by a murmur Jared couldn't quite make out. For a moment Jared thought he heard the man say, "You won't make it that far," though it was faint enough to be dismissed as a trick of the ear. Jared's unease grew when the truck veered off the main road without warning, leaving behind the paved highway for a bumpy dirt path that carved deeper into the forest's outskirts. Heavy tree cover obscured any remaining daylight, and the drizzling rain had thickened into a steady downpour, turning the dirt into slick mud. The man didn't explain the sudden change in route, and Jared didn't dare ask. He simply sat in tense silence, his fingers unconsciously tightening around the strap of his backpack. "What trailhead are you looking for again?" the driver finally asked, breaking the quiet. Line Creek?" Jared stammered, though his confidence was faltering. The man didn't reply. Instead, he slowed the truck, glancing at something in the rearview mirror before muttering under his breath. By this point, Jared's gut instinct was screaming at him. Something was wrong. The man's movements grew jittery, and his knuckles turned white on the steering wheel as he navigated the slippery trail. A strange smell, faintly metallic and sharp, began wafting through the cab of the truck. Jared's pulse quickened. His mind raced with scenarios, each one worse than the last. Was this just a quirky local taking the scenic route, or had he just put himself in a life-threatening situation? When the truck skidded to a stop in a small clearing surrounded by dense forest, Jared's fears crystallized. The man turned to him with a disconcerting grin that didn't reach his eyes. "End of the line," the driver muttered. Jared didn't think. He acted. Throwing open the door, he leapt out into the rain and mud, slipping and scrambling to his feet as the man shouted something unintelligible behind him. Ignoring the burn in his legs and the weight of his soaked pack against his shoulders, Jared ran as fast as he could, plunging into the trees without looking back. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows and mist, its eerie silence punctuated only by the sound of Jared's ragged breaths and the snapping of branches underfoot. He had no idea where he was going, but his only goal was to put as much distance as possible between himself and the man in the truck. After what felt like hours, Jared stumbled across a trail marker, though it was so faded and moss-covered that it offered little guidance. Exhausted, he collapsed by the side of the trail, waiting for daylight to break. All night he thought he heard footsteps in the distance, deliberate and slow, as if someone, or something, was circling him. He told himself it was just paranoia, but he never closed his eyes. By dawn, Jared found his way back to a more recognizable part of the forest, and eventually flagged down a search and rescue patrol conducting routine rounds near the southern edge. His disheveled appearance and frantic story immediately caught their attention. After being escorted back to town, Jared recounted the chilling details to Detective Alan Brewer and his team, who had been investigating the Black Mist disappearances for more than 2 years. Jared's description of the driver matched reports of a suspicious figure spotted near previous disappearances, a man known locally as David Lucien, a reclusive former soldier who lived on the outskirts of the forest. Lucien had long been rumored to frequent the deeper, uncharted areas of the Black Mist, and was known for his volatile temper and strange behavior. Jared's testimony finally gave Brewer the lead he needed to bring Lucien into focus as a prime suspect. Though Jared escaped with his life, the terrifying encounter left him deeply shaken. "I don't want to know what would have happened if I stayed in that truck," he told police, his voice trembling. "He wasn't just some weirdo giving me a ride. He had something planned, and it wasn't good." Jared's lucky escape was a turning point in the investigation, but it also served as a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking within the Black Mist Forest. For the first time, authorities had a name, a face, and the possibility of finally uncovering the terrible truths hidden beneath the forest's veil of mist. The prime suspect emerges. The discovery of Emily Brooks's body, and Jared Olson's narrow escape, had set the Black Mist Forest investigation ablaze. For years, the disappearances and tragedies surrounding the forest were seen as eerie coincidences, something belonging more to urban legend than crime statistics. But the testimony of Jared, the luckiest person to ever walk out of the woods alive, gave Detective Alan Brewer and his team a concrete lead. That lead had a name: David Lucien. David Lucien was no tourist, nor was he an occasional wanderer stumbling into the mist like so many of the forest's hapless victims. This man had lived in the shadow of the Black Mist Forest for almost 2 decades. His small, rotting cabin sat deep near the southern edge of the woods, far from any major roads, and even farther from the prying eyes of society. Locals described him in whispers. To those in the nearby towns, Lucien was an enigma, a ghost of a man who seemed suited to the isolation of the forest. Rarely seen except for brief trips into town to buy supplies, he embodied the exact kind of loner that small communities learn to fear over time. Detective Brewer combed through Lucien's background, hoping to piece together who this man really was, and why a chill ran down Jared Olson's spine after riding in his truck. What he uncovered was both fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. David Lucien was born in Christchurch in 1953 to a working-class family. His early years were unremarkable. No real disciplinary issues, no signs of violence, nothing to suggest he would later become the subject of a nationwide manhunt. But then came his military years. Lucien enlisted in the New Zealand Defence Force right out of high school, excelling particularly in survival training. He was frequently praised for his ability to navigate the harshest terrains, his calm demeanor under pressure, and his skill with weapons. His commanding officers spoke of his uncanny knack for vanishing into thick bushland during field exercises, a skill that earned him the nickname Ghost. But service shaped him in darker ways too. Records showed that Lucien was deployed to several contentious military operations during his career, ones that had likely exposed him to the horrors of war. When he left the military in the late 1970s, something had changed. One former comrade who spoke anonymously described David as a man obsessed with control. He seemed comfortable out in the bush, but around people, he could turn volatile in an instant. After his discharge, Lucien drifted, moving between remote areas of New Zealand before finally settling on the outskirts of the Black Mist Forest. By the early 1980s, he had dropped off the map almost entirely. He built a life that required little human interaction, except for the occasional trip to a hardware store or gas station for supplies. His cabin, eventually located by Brewer's team, was hidden deep within a remote ravine, practically invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. It wasn't just Lucien's reclusive nature or his military past that raised red flags for Brewer. The items police found in his possession after searching his home painted an even darker picture. Upon obtaining a warrant to raid Lucien's cabin, investigators uncovered a trove of unsettling evidence. Guns, knives, and other weapons hung meticulously on the walls, a rogue arsenal far larger than what one man living alone in the wild would ever reasonably need. Beyond weapons, rope that matched the bindings found on Emily Brooks' body coiled neatly in a corner. Maps of the Black Mist Forest, detailed down to obscure paths and barely visible animal trails, lay sprawled across a table. Some of the maps were even annotated, marking areas that the average hiker would pass by without a thought. And then there were the personal items. The most damning finds were jewelry, watches, and small trinkets clearly unrelated to Lucien. Brewer immediately suspected these were keepsakes, grotesque trophies taken from victims in a sick ritual of remembrance. Among the pile of items, a camera belonging to Stephanie Miller, the young photographer who had vanished with her 2 friends in 1992. The Polaroid recovered near the second crime scene, showing that fateful camping trip, matched images developed from the camera's film. Lucien's truck was no less incriminating. Police found stains consistent with blood in the back seat, hidden beneath layers of old blankets. Though degraded by time and environmental exposure, DNA testing later confirmed that the blood belonged to Emily Brooks. Faced with overwhelming evidence, authorities moved quickly, arresting Lucien at a roadside stop one chilly morning. Reports claimed his face was expressionless, even as officers forced him out of his vehicle and clamped handcuffs over his wrists. He didn't resist, nor did he ask any questions. To Brewer, his stoic demeanor was even more unnerving than if he'd panicked or pleaded. It was the face of a man who had accepted his fate, or perhaps had believed this moment would come for far too long. The arrest sent shockwaves through the entire country. Headlines declared, The Black Mist Killer Unmasked and the man behind New Zealand's most infamous mystery. Journalists descended upon the small towns surrounding the forest, eager to dig into the hermit-like man now infamous for his possible connection to decades of disappearances. News anchors described him as the forest's shadow personified, a man who had turned the vast wilderness to his dark advantage, but the arrest only deepened the mystery rather than resolved it. Interviews failed to crack Lucien's stony exterior. He provided no confession, no motive, no acknowledgement of guilt. Of the 13 disappearances officially linked to the Black Mist Forest, Lucien denied involvement in all but 2. "I only took what the forest wanted me to take," he reportedly told Brewer during one cryptic exchange. What exactly he meant by that left investigators baffled. Even in custody, Lucien seemed to wield a strange psychological power over everyone involved in the case. Officers assigned to interrogate him described a chill in the air when he spoke, as though his crimes had seeped into his very presence, leaving those around him uneasy. Some investigators believed him to be a cold-blooded killer operating purely out of calculated malice. Others speculated he believed himself to be enacting some twisted sense of retribution, as if the forest itself had compelled him to target those who dared step too far into its shrouded depths. The discovery and arrest of David Lucien was a turning point, but it wasn't the end. Questions lingered. How many victims were still out there, hidden beneath the mist? Was Lucien truly acting alone, or were there others who shared his macabre obsession? And why did the forest, vast and indifferent, always seem to conspire with those who sought to keep its secrets? As the nation prepared for the trial of the century, one thing remained certain. Black Mist Forest had been harboring a dangerous predator for years, and though Lucien now sat behind bars, the legacy of his crimes, and the terror they inspired, was far from over. The Dark Past of David Lucien. By the time David Lucien's name was spoken in connection to the horrors of the Black Mist Forest, his reputation had already morphed into something sinister, almost larger than life. To outsiders, he was the reclusive drifter who lived on the edge of nowhere, an odd yet harmless hermit who steered clear of civilization. To those who knew his history, he was much more than that, someone haunted by his own demons, armed with deadly skills, and potentially unhinged. As investigators delved deeper into Lucien's past, they uncovered a man shaped by chaos, conflict, solitude, and a troubling obsession with control. David Lucien was born on a rainy November day in 1953 in Christchurch, New Zealand. His upbringing could best be described as unremarkable. He was the youngest of 3 siblings, raised in a working-class household where his father was a mechanic, and his mother worked part-time as a seamstress. By all accounts, the Lucien family was ordinary, except for one glaring detail. David was always different. From a young age, teachers described him as withdrawn, a child who preferred to sit by himself during recess instead of playing games like the other kids. He seldom spoke in class but maintained excellent grades, particularly in subjects like mathematics and science. His intelligence set him apart, but it was his eerie calmness in the face of conflict that unsettled those around him. A psychological evaluation performed during his teenage years, after an altercation with a classmate, noted that David displayed a distinct lack of empathy and an understanding of social norms that was almost clinical in nature. Things changed drastically in 1972 at the age of 19 when David enlisted in the New Zealand Defence Force. For the first time, he seemed to thrive. It was as though the military structure provided him with a purpose and an outlet for his calculated, hyper-focused tendencies. He quickly gained a reputation among his superiors as an exceptional soldier. His aptitude for survival training was unmatched. Whether it was navigating dense jungle terrain, setting traps with limited resources, or enduring extreme weather conditions, David excelled in every test. The higher-ups even gave him a nickname, Ghost. He could move silently through the bush, recalled a former commanding officer. The kind of guy who could sneak up on you even if you thought you were the one tracking him. It was like he belonged out there, in the wilderness. He wasn't quick to anger, but there was always this edge to him, like he was holding something back. Something dangerous. The traits that made him an ideal soldier also made him the perfect candidate for high-stakes missions. Lucien was deployed in several military operations, many of which involved reconnaissance near hostile territories. These missions exposed him to the brutal realities of war. Declassified documents revealed that Lucien's unit often operated under conditions of extreme pressure. including situations where they were forced to ambush enemies or eliminate threats without hesitation. The turning point in David's life, however, came on a mission in 1976, one that would later seep into his darkest nightmares. The details were scarce, most of the operation's events remain classified, but military records indicate that Lucien's team had been sent into an enemy-held jungle with orders to retrieve intelligence and neutralize potential combatants. What began as a straightforward mission turned into a bloodbath. The official report described it as an engagement gone wrong, but whispers among military circles told a different story. Lucien's team was outnumbered, forced to scatter, and hunted through the jungle for days. One survivor would later recount that Lucien was the last one standing, relying solely on his survival skills to evade the enemy and make it back to safety. But the cost was steep. He was wounded, malnourished, and profoundly changed by what he had witnessed. When Lucien left the military in 1978, he carried the heavy burden of war with him. Medical evaluations recorded symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, night terrors, hyper-awareness, and an increasing inability to assimilate back into civilian life. Yet instead of seeking help or staying connected to reality, Lucien chose isolation. He vanished from public life and began wandering through New Zealand's most remote wilderness areas, eventually settling near the Black Mist Forest in the early 1980s. He built a small cabin on a plot of land that seemed to exist outside the notice of government records. His neighbors, if they could be called that given the vast distance between homes, rarely saw him. Despite his solitude, some locals reported unsettling encounters. One man recalled Lucien appearing on his property unannounced, staring at him from the edge of the woods before vanishing when confronted. Another neighbor claimed Lucien had once offered to show him how to disappear in the forest, a remark that seemed innocuous at the time but now haunts those who remember it. In 1987, 5 years into his self-imposed exile, Lucien briefly re-entered public consciousness when he was accused of attacking a pair of tourists camping near his property. The couple claimed they had heard strange noises around their tent and awoke to find a man standing over them in the moonlight. The description they gave matched David Lucien right down to his pale blue eyes. However, lacking physical evidence, the case against him was dismissed. This incident, though troubling, didn't stop Lucien from sinking further into isolation. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, he had become a permanent ghost on the periphery of the Black Mist Forest, venturing into town only to purchase supplies or pawn trinkets, the origins of which would later come under scrutiny. What caught Detective Brewer's attention most during his investigation of Lucien's past wasn't just the man's military background or his odd behavior, but a particular pattern. Starting in 1983, shortly after Lucien moved near the forest, reports of missing hikers began to spike in the Black Mist area. Some were written off as accidents, hikers unprepared for the harsh wilderness, but others were far stranger. The hikers left behind no trace, their disappearances defying explanation. And as Brewer dug deeper, he realized several of these cases had one thing in common: sightings of a suspicious man lurking near trailheads or lone campsites, a man who always seemed to disappear before anyone could fully identify him. Was David Lucien simply a damaged recluse forged by the violence of his past, or had his years in the wilderness awakened something darker inside of him, something that allowed him not only to kill but to thrive in an environment where no one would ever find his victims? As the details of Lucien's history came to light, the real question began to emerge. Was Lucien the hunter, or was he merely part of something even more terrifying, something that had always lived within the mist-shrouded trees, waiting for the right man to answer its call? The trial that shocked the nation and the final justice. By the time David Lucien was brought to trial in the summer of 1993, he was no longer just a man. He had become a chilling symbol for the unspeakable horrors of the Black Mist Forest, a living embodiment of the sinister unknown. The courtroom was packed to capacity on the first day of the trial. Outside, hundreds of spectators gathered, some holding signs demanding justice for the victims, others just driven by morbid fascination for the accused. Journalists loitered on every street corner, their flashing cameras capturing every angle of Lucien's arrival. Escorted into the courthouse under heavy guard, Lucien looked much the same as he did on the day he was arrested. Calm, cold, and completely devoid of emotion. His pale blue eyes betrayed nothing, not even when the names of his alleged victims were read aloud. The trial was quickly dubbed the trial of the century by local and international media. For weeks it dominated headlines, overshadowing even the biggest global events of the time. New Zealand's justice system, rarely tested by cases of this magnitude, suddenly found itself thrust into the international spotlight. Security around the courthouse was uncharacteristically tight, with armed guards stationed inside and out. Every detail of the trial, from the opening statements to the grim testimonies, was dissected by the public. David Lucien faced multiple charges of first-degree murder, unlawful imprisonment, and several counts of tampering with evidence in connection to the Black Mist Forest disappearances. Prosecutors laid out an exhaustive case against him, painting a picture of a methodical and remorseless predator who stalked, captured, and brutally murdered his victims over the span of a decade. Their argument was bolstered by a mountain of forensic evidence recovered from Lucien's cabin and truck, including DNA, personal belongings of the victims, and the rope used to bind Emily Brooks before her tragic death. The evidence unveiled. Key moments of the trial revolved around the uncovering of evidence that left the courtroom silent with shock. Prosecutors detailed how investigators had pieced together Lucien's movements and tied him to multiple disappearances. They presented photographs of his cabin walls where maps of the Black Mist Forest hung like trophies. Each map had markings and annotations, detailing paths and secluded areas unknown even to experienced trail guides. Then came the most damning evidence. DNA traces from multiple victims, including Emily Brooks and one member of the hiking trio who vanished in 1992, were found in Lucien's truck. Forensic experts testified that the blood patterns in the vehicle suggested that someone inside had fought for their life. Blood and tissue samples also matched the remains discovered in shallow graves scattered across the forest. One victim's jewelry, a bracelet engraved with her initials, was found in a box inside the cabin, alongside a collection of watches, rings, and other items believed to belong to at least 5 additional missing persons. More chilling was the revelation of handwritten notes found among Lucien's belongings. In a diary with frayed leather binding, investigators uncovered cryptic entries. Some were clear accounts of watching hikers from afar, while others were more disturbing, snippets like, "The forest speaks when I am quiet," and "The mist hides what it wants to keep." The testimonies that shook the room. Prosecutors called on a long line of witnesses, family members of the victims, locals who remembered unsettling run-ins with Lucien, and experts in criminal psychology who dissected his behavior. But the most powerful moment of all came when Jared Olson, the hitchhiker who narrowly escaped Lucien's clutches, took the stand. Jared, visibly shaken even a year after his terrifying encounter, recounted in harrowing detail the night he fled from Lucien's truck deep in the forest. His voice trembled as he described the man's eerie calmness, the veiled threats, and the moment his instincts screamed at him to run. "I know I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't gotten away," Jared told the courtroom. His testimony left no doubt that Lucien was a calculated and dangerous individual capable of unimaginable cruelty. Defense attorneys tried to dismiss Jared's story, insinuating that his account was exaggerated or heavily influenced by media narratives. They attempted to paint Lucien as a misunderstood recluse, a man traumatized by his military past who simply wanted solitude. They emphasized the lack of direct eyewitness accounts, tying Lucien to the actual murders, claiming that any forensic evidence found at his cabin or truck could have been planted by others. But the arguments fell flat under the weight of the overwhelming evidence against their client. Lucien's silence. Throughout the trial, Lucien remained a figure of unsettling composure. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his words only added to the chilling aura surrounding him. During cross-examination, when pressed about his time in the Black Mist Forest, and the incriminating evidence found in his possession, Lucien responded cryptically, "I didn't take them, the forest did." His refusal to show remorse or offer a clear explanation only deepened the public's outrage. Psychologists who observed Lucien during the trial described him as a man detached from reality. Some speculated that he believed himself to be an extension of the forest, an agent of its will, carrying out its judgment on those who entered too deeply. Others argued he was simply a manipulative sociopath exploiting the region's folklore to mask his crimes. Either way, his lack of humanity was unmistakable. The verdict and the sentence. After 2 months of emotional testimony and exhaustive forensic analysis, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. On August 27, 1993, the verdict was read aloud in a courtroom packed with grieving families, journalists, and spectators hungry for closure. "David Lucien, you are found guilty of all charges. Gasps and muffled sobs filled the courtroom as the judge addressed Lucien directly during sentencing. Your actions robbed families of their loved ones and stained a place of natural beauty with unspeakable horror. You are not simply a danger to society. You are a nightmare made flesh. For the lives you've taken and the pain you've caused, you will never see freedom again. Lucien was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, the harshest penalty allowed under New Zealand law. The aftermath. Outside the courthouse, families of the victims held one another tightly, some crying tears of relief, others quietly reflecting on the justice that felt long overdue. But there was also an undercurrent of frustration. Closure was incomplete. Despite the conviction, many believed there were still unanswered questions hovering over the case. How many victims had Lucien actually claimed? Were there others missing, still buried beneath the forest floor? And what exactly drove a man like him to such monstrous deeds? For the people of New Zealand, the trial of David Lucien wasn't just about justice. It was a reckoning with the dark underbelly of human nature and the mysteries hidden within the Black Mist Forest. Though the forest now had one less predator, its reputation as a place of danger and dread remained, and the scars left by Lucien's crimes would haunt the region for years to come. And as for Lucien, behind bars, he remained just as silent and cryptic, muttering only one phrase when reporters asked if he had any regrets. The forest isn't finished. The legacy of fear. The trial of David Lucien may have marked the end of his reign of terror, but the shadow he cast over the Black Mist Forest lingered long after the courtroom doors closed. Even years later, the impact of his crimes stretched far beyond the dense, mist-shrouded trees that had once been his hunting grounds. For the families of his victims, for the local townspeople, and for the countless adventurers who had once been drawn to the forest's beauty, Lucien's atrocities altered how they viewed the Black Mist forever. The forest, once celebrated as a postcard-perfect wilderness, had gained a reputation that no amount of tourism campaigns could ever erase. Its beauty, though undeniable, now came with an edge of dread. When people spoke of the Black Mist Forest, they no longer described mythical trails or the serenity of its untouched nature. Instead, they whispered about its darkest corners, about the crimes that had unfolded in its depths, and the lives lost to its unforgiving grip. A changed perception. For the locals living in the towns and villages surrounding the Black Mist, life was never the same. What had once been a serene, albeit mysterious place to explore became something far more ominous. Parents warned their children to never set foot near the forest. Stories once whispered for the sake of folklore, the legends of Tapu land guarded by spirits, took on new urgency. Now there was a human monster to blame, a tangible evil backing up those warnings. Hikers who dared to enter the trails always signed in at the registration books, but their entries betrayed their unease. The names, scrawled in trembling handwriting, were sometimes accompanied by chilling notes. "If I don't return, remember my name." Others wrote cryptic remarks about the mist feeling alive or footsteps where there were none. For every visitor who returned safely, the forest seemed to cling to its reputation as a mysterious predator, always watching, always waiting, and occasionally claiming its next victim. Despite the heavy precautions implemented in the aftermath of Lucien's trial, fear remained palpable. Warning signs were posted at trailheads, advising hikers about the dangers. Do not hike alone, trails are easy to lose, carry emergency supplies. But these warnings, intended for practical safety, felt more like ominous predictions to those who read them. Hesitation among adventurers. The Black Mist, once considered a mecca for outdoor adventurers seeking a challenge, became a polarizing destination. Thrill-seekers viewed it as the ultimate test of courage, a chance to walk among the darkness that had frightened so many before them. Social media posts from hikers brave enough to enter the forest began to use the hashtag #BlackMistSurvivor, turning the act of conquering the trails into a grim badge of honor. Yet just as many people avoided the area entirely. Tourists from halfway across the world would point to the news clippings of David Lucien when explaining why they'd opted to skip that particular destination. Families cautiously studying travel guides marked the Black Mist as off-limits. Local guides who had once made a living leading others through the twisting paths saw their businesses dwindle, their livelihoods vanishing as quickly as the hikers who had haunted the headlines. And for those who did enter the forest, the weight of its history loomed heavy. It was nearly impossible to walk those same trails without imagining the footsteps of Emily Brooks or the trio of missing friends from 1992. Every crunch of leaves underfoot, Every sudden rustle of branches felt like a ghostly echo of the past, the eternal scar on loved ones. For the victims' families and friends, the passage of time did little to dull the pain. Though justice had been served, closure remained elusive. Many relatives still visited the Black Mist Forest every year, leaving behind flowers, stones, or handwritten notes at the trailheads where their loved ones had last been seen alive. One mother of a missing hiker left a small wooden cross etched with the words, "You will always have a place here." For those who had never recovered their loved ones' remains, the forest became both a graveyard and a symbol of hope. People would visit, imagining that perhaps their missing family members had found some way of surviving deep within the forest's depths, living off the land in obscurity. Others brought pictures, pressing them into the bark of trees or hiding them beneath rocks, as though leaving these relics would call their loved ones home. But year after year, the silence of the forest offered no answers. The psychological legacy. For the residents of the surrounding towns and for the law enforcement officials who had worked the case, the legacy of David Lucien was not something that faded quickly. Many of the officers who had combed through his cabin or unearthed remains from the shallow graves carried scars invisible to the human eye. PTSD counseling became standard for anyone involved in the search and recovery missions, while some rangers simply packed up and left, unwilling to continue working so close to a place with so much darkness tied to it. Meanwhile, superstition returned to the forefront of local folklore. Stories of Lucien's connection to the forest, or at least how the forest had influenced him, spread through bars and late-night campfires. People whispered that the mist had entered his mind, commanding him to kill, or that the forest had sensed his darkness and used him for its bidding. Some began referring to the black mist as the forest that keeps, hinting at its unspoken agreement to devour all who wandered too far. The cultural impact. The trial and crimes of David Lucien left an indelible mark on New Zealand as a whole. Documentaries, true crime books, and dramatized television series chronicled his life and the atrocities tied to the Black Mist Forest. Filmmakers and writers portrayed the forest as a character in its own right, an ancient being that had somehow influenced or even partnered with Lucien. Tourism boards tried desperately to pivot back toward the forest's natural beauty, but the ghost of Lucien loomed too large. For every picture-perfect waterfall or breathtaking mountain view, there was a darker story lurking just beneath the surface, a story people simply couldn't forget. And yet, this dark notoriety drew an entirely new crowd. Paranormal enthusiasts, amateur detectives, and conspiracy theorists descended on the area, each interpreting the forest's silence in their own way. Some held seances at the forest boundaries while others trekked through the mist documenting supposed ghostly activity. The forest that once symbolized untouched wilderness had become a destination of morbid curiosity. The forest lives on even now. Standing at the edge of the Black Mist Forest feels like standing at the edge of something alive, something ancient and unknowable. The trees sway gently in the wind, their whispers just soft enough to make your mind question its surroundings. To stare into the mist is to confront the unknown, an eerie reminder of the lives lost and the secrets the forest still holds tightly in its grasp. Decades have passed, but whispers still carry across the towns around Black Mist. What happened during those dark years of David Lucien's crimes? Had the forest shaped him into the monster he became, or had it merely provided the perfect cover for a predator destined to roam free? No one knows for certain, but one thing is clear: the Black Mist Forest doesn't easily let go of its legacy. It clings like the mist itself, a reminder that some places never lose their shadows. The questions that remain unanswered. David Lucien may have been arrested, tried, and condemned to a lifetime behind bars, but the resolution of his case hardly brought the closure so many had hoped for. Instead, it left behind a swirling void of mystery, a series of unanswered questions that continue to haunt not only the families of the victims, but also the investigators, locals, and even the nation as a whole. No matter how many headlines boasted phrases like "the monster is caged" or "justice served for Black Mist victims," a deep sense of incompletion lingered like a thick fog over the case. Did Lucien act alone? Was he truly responsible for every disappearance, or were there other players involved? How many more victims might still lie undiscovered beneath the forest floor, their names and stories forever lost to the shadows? And beyond the factual questions, a darker, more existential inquiry loomed. Was Lucien simply a deranged killer who capitalized on the isolation of the Black Mist Forest? Or did the forest itself play a role in shaping the nightmare? Were there more victims? At the heart of the many questions is the uncertainty about the full scope of Lucien's crimes. Prosecutors tied him to 12 confirmed disappearances, and he was officially charged with 8 counts of murder. However, even investigators admitted that the true number could be much higher. The discovery of shallow graves in remote parts of the forest only scratched the surface of its vast, uncharted terrain. The Black Mist Forest stretches for hundreds of square miles, full of rugged cliffs, hidden ravines, and overgrown trails that dissolve into oblivion. It's the kind of place where a body could remain hidden for decades, or forever. Over the years, anonymous tips from hunters, hikers, and locals trickled in, reporting skeletal remains, partial artifacts like old boots or torn backpacks, and eerie makeshift symbols arranged in the underbrush. But searches often ended in frustration. The sheer size of the forest made it easy to lose a trail or miss critical evidence. Some searchers admitted a strange, almost suffocating feeling while combing the deeper woods, saying the mist seemed to swallow clues. One officer said bluntly, "For every grave we find there could be 10 more out there. Or 50. Families of long-missing hikers clung to these discoveries with guarded hope. For them, the gruesome details of Lucien's crimes weren't as important as the potential of finally recovering their loved ones. But even as evidence surfaced and new graves were unearthed, many of the dead remained unidentified. The faces in photographs, the names on missing persons posters, they linger unresolved, their stories forever trapped within the mist. Did Lucien have accomplices? Another enduring question centers on Lucien's potentially broader network, or lack thereof. Could one man, even a seasoned survivalist like Lucien, realistically carry out a string of murders over 2 decades without help? Some investigators found it difficult to believe. Lucien's military background made him exceptional at disappearing and surviving alone, but the logistics of his crimes suggest a level of coordination that may not be feasible for a solitary operator. Abductions, murders, and the careful concealment of bodies require time and effort, particularly in the untamed wilderness of the Black Mist. Still, Lucien's taciturn nature left investigators without answers to this troubling possibility. Despite his silence, records of Lucien's life showed curious gaps, periods where he vanished altogether, or reportedly had contact with other reclusive outliers living in the area. Interviews with locals unearthed rumors of hidden hermit enclaves within the forest. One farmer recalled seeing Lucien speaking with an unfamiliar man in the woods near his land. "I don't know what they were talking about," he said. But the other guy didn't feel right either. Same energy as Lucien, like the forest had gotten into him somehow. Was Lucien part of a loose network of outlaws, drifters, or like-minded individuals who lurked in the forest, hidden away from society? Or were these sightings the product of paranoia bolstered by myths of the Black Mist Forest? Brewer, the lead detective on the case, remained skeptical of the accomplice theory but admitted, "If he wasn't alone, we still don't know who his partners, or successors, might be." The forest's role. The most haunting questions of all don't revolve around Lucien's crimes but rather the nature of the Black Mist Forest itself. For decades, locals had warned of its dangers long before Lucien appeared on the scene. Its dense woods, perpetually covered in fog, were seen as forbidding and even sacred by the indigenous Maori people, who described certain areas as tapu, or forbidden. Did the forest simply attract a predator like Lucien, giving him the perfect cover for his violence? Or was there something more, something darker, about the Black Mist that encouraged his monstrous behavior? The eerie commonalities across many disappearances, a supernatural stillness, whispers of shadowy figures in the distance, animals behaving oddly, all contributed to the forest's near-mythical status among those who lived in its shadow. Jared Olson, the lone survivor of an encounter with Lucien, spoke years later about the night he fled into the misty wilderness. "It felt like the forest was alive, like it was pulling me deeper. I kept thinking, if I stop running, I'm never going to leave." Even Lucien himself fed the legend of the forest. His cryptic remarks during his trial, "I only took what the forest wanted me to take," and "the forest isn't finished," hinted at a twisted connection between the man and the land. Was it all part of his manipulation, a strategy to bolster his mythos? Or did Lucien genuinely believe he was an instrument of the forest's will? Some psychologists posited that the isolation of the Black Mist and its unnerving, otherworldly ambiance might have driven Lucien deeper into psychosis. But others raised a more chilling possibility. What if Lucien wasn't delusional? What if the forest itself, ancient and unknowable, truly exerted some kind of influence on those who spent too much time in its depths. Why did Lucien remain silent? Lucien's refusal to cooperate during questioning only deepened the mystery surrounding his crimes. When asked about his methods, motives, and victims, he offered nothing but cryptic phrases that seemed designed to confuse or unsettle his interrogators. Was his silence an act of defiance, a final effort to maintain control over his narrative? Or was it something else, perhaps even fear? One investigator, reflecting on Lucien's behavior, speculated that the man wasn't just protecting himself. It felt like he was protecting something bigger, like he didn't want us to get too close to whatever was hiding in that forest. The questions that outlived the answers. Ultimately, the end of David Lucien's trial did not signal the end of the Black Mist Forest's mysteries. For every answer his arrest provided, a dozen more questions arose. How many victims still remain unfound, their stories untold? Were Lucien's actions entirely his own, or was he influenced or even guided by something greater? And most chilling of all, will the forest ever truly be safe, or has it simply been waiting all along for another predator to take up residence among the trees? The Black Mist Forest remains what it has always been, an enigma. Its beauty is undeniable, but so is its darkness. The crime scenes have been cleared and the courtroom dramas have ended. Yet the questions continue to linger, carried by the whispers of the mist. Perhaps the forest keeps its secrets for a reason. Perhaps we're not meant to know.